Before we begin the video, please subscribe to our channel Heroes for Animals so you won't miss any of the best stories about amazing dogs. The K9 officer lunged, not at the suspect, not at a weapon, but at the front door of a suburban home. It was 6:04 a.m., and the quiet cul-de-sac had only just started to stir. Birds chirped in the sycamores lining the street. Sprinklers hissed softly across manicured lawns. But on the porch of 214 Brookstone Lane, something was terribly wrong. Sergeant Daniel Ross tightened his grip on the leash. "Easy, Juno," he whispered. But the German shepherd didn't flinch. She planted her paws, hackles raised, and let out a low, guttural growl. Her body blocked the front door like a living barricade. This wasn't like her. Ross had worked with Juno for 5 years. She was level-headed, tactical, trained for search and rescue, narcotics, and emergency breach scenarios. She never disobeyed a command. Until now. He stepped forward, but she lunged sideways, cutting him off again, teeth bared, nose flaring toward the crack between the door and the frame. She whined just once. A quiet, mournful sound that made Ross's stomach twist. He looked up at the house. From the outside, everything seemed normal. Curtains drawn. Porch light flickering from the motion sensor. No signs of forced entry, no shattered glass, no overturned planters. But Juno's body told a different story. Something inside that house wasn't right. They were supposed to be conducting a welfare check. A neighbor had called in a concern. Mrs. Evelyn Holloway, age 74, hadn't answered her phone in 2 days. Her car hadn't moved. Newspapers piled at the front step. Ross had responded to hundreds of similar calls. Most of the time, it was nothing. A dead phone battery. A long nap. A weekend away with no heads up. But the look in Juno's eyes stopped him cold. She wasn't acting out of excitement. She wasn't excited at all. She was afraid. Ross pressed the side of his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4. I'm at the residence on Brookstone. Can you confirm if there's any recent medical history flagged on Evelyn Holloway?" A pause crackled back. "Negative," the dispatcher replied. "Only note on file is mild dementia diagnosis last year. No current open medical alerts." Ross glanced again at the door. Juno let out another short bark, sharp, urgent. Then something happened. From inside the house, a faint thump. Like a footstep, or something being dropped. Ross's heart skipped. He raised a hand to knock, but Juno snapped her teeth at the air and barked again, louder this time, slamming her body against the doorframe. Her muscles tensed. Her tail dropped. She looked like she was trying to hold him back. "Okay," he muttered. "Okay, girl. I hear you." He stepped back, unclipped her leash, and let her pace. She didn't run off, just circled the porch, her nose tracing the air, her ears flicking toward the house. Ross bent down and slid a small camera scope through the mailbox slot. The hallway inside was dim. No movement. No lights. But down the hall, something caught the camera's eye, an overturned walker. And a pair of slippers, one standing, one on its side. "Dispatch, I'm requesting permission to force entry. Possible medical emergency." "Copy that, Unit 4. Proceed." Ross reached for the door handle. Juno snarled. He froze. She stepped between him and the door, pressing her head hard against his thigh, eyes locked on the house like she could see something he couldn't. Her body trembled, not from fear but from warning. She didn't want him to go in. Ross hesitated. Every protocol screamed that he should enter. But everything about Juno's behavior screamed something else. He knelt down, rested his hand on her side. "Talk to me, girl," he said softly. Juno backed up a step, then looked at him, and for just a second, it felt like she was begging. That's when the doorknob turned from the inside. Ross's hand flew to his holster. He stepped back, shielding Juno behind him. The door creaked open, just a sliver. Darkness spilled from the gap like ink. And then, nothing. No voice. No footsteps. No face. Just the door, slightly ajar. Ross called out, "Mrs. Holloway? This is the police. Is everything all right?" No answer. He reached forward cautiously, pushed the door open with the tip of his boot, and Juno barked once, shrill and urgent, then bolted past him into the house. "Juno! Wait!" But she was gone, disappeared down the hallway like a shot. Ross charged in after her. The air inside was thick, musty. The blinds were drawn, and a strange metallic scent hung in the air. His boots thudded softly on the hardwood floor as he followed Juno's paw prints down the corridor. Then he heard it. A whimper. Not Juno's, but human. He reached the living room, and froze. Juno stood in front of the fireplace, body rigid, facing the armchair. And in that chair was Evelyn Holloway. Her face was pale. Eyes half closed. One hand hanging limply over the side, the other gripping something tightly in her lap. Her breathing was shallow. Ross stepped forward slowly. "Ma'am! Evelyn?" Her eyes fluttered. Then her lips moved. "They told me not to move," she whispered hoarsely, "or it would go off." Ross's blood ran cold. He looked down. And saw it. In her lap, hidden beneath a woolen shawl, was a device. Wires. A blinking light. And beside her hand, a detonator. Juno hadn't been trying to stop Ross from entering the house. She had been trying to keep him alive. Her name was Evelyn Holloway. 74 years old. A retired librarian, widow of a Vietnam veteran, and longtime resident of the neighborhood. To anyone who knew her, Evelyn was the kind of woman who baked cookies for the mailman and brought soup to sick neighbors. She was quiet, kind, safe. And yet, here she was, trembling in her armchair, a crude device strapped to her lap, and a detonator resting against her fragile fingers. Sergeant Ross felt his training take over, but his heart was pounding in his chest like a war drum. He raised his hand slowly. "Evelyn," he said gently, crouching low to her level, "I'm here to help. But I need you to stay very still, okay? Just keep talking to me." Her eyes brimmed with tears. "I didn't know who else to call. They said if I touched the phone, if I moved, it would kill me. I was afraid to even breathe." Behind Ross, Juno remained perfectly still. Not a single growl or bark now, just steady, focused presence. She lay down beside Evelyn, her body pressed to the carpet, her eyes locked on the blinking light beneath the shawl. Watching. Calculating. Ross tapped his shoulder mic. "Dispatch, I need EOD immediately. We have a possible live device. Elderly woman. Suspected hostage situation. Advise bomb squad to enter from the rear side entrance. Do not approach front door." "Copy that, Unit 4. Bomb squad en route. ETA 7 minutes. 7 minutes? 7 minutes was a lifetime when you were sitting in a living room with a ticking bomb and a woman whose finger hovered half an inch from a trigger. Ross kept his voice steady, even though his throat felt tight. "Evelyn, can you tell me who did this to you?" She shook her head. "I never saw his face. He wore gloves. A hood. He came in the middle of the night. Said he'd been watching me. Said I was perfect because nobody would suspect an old woman. Then he strapped it to me. Told me to wait. That someone would come for it later." Ross felt something cold slither down his spine. This wasn't just about Evelyn. This was a larger plan. His eyes flicked toward the front window, toward the quiet street outside. How many others were watching? And yet, in all this chaos, Juno never moved from her spot. She wasn't panicked. She wasn't barking or pacing like other dogs might. She was vigilant. Purposeful. Like she understood what was at stake. Ross remembered her behavior on the porch, how she'd physically stopped him, refused to let him enter. She'd sensed it even through the walls. How? Juno had been trained in explosive detection. But this wasn't a traditional bomb scene. There were no overt chemical markers, no gasoline or obvious explosive odors. And yet, Juno had reacted, not just to the scent, but to something else. It was like she'd felt the tension. The energy. The heartbeat of fear pulsing from inside that house. Ross turned his attention back to Evelyn, who was starting to tremble more violently now. Her grip on the device slipped slightly. "Evelyn, listen to me," he said firmly. "Help is on the way. But I need you to stay completely still. Can you do that for me?" She blinked at him. "I'll try." Ross slowly reached into his belt and pulled out a small flashlight. "I'm just going to scan the area under your chair. I won't touch anything. Just look." He aimed the beam carefully. Wires. Electrical tape. A small circuit board mounted on a gray plastic shell. It looked makeshift, but somehow sophisticated. This wasn't the work of a kid. This was someone who knew what they were doing. And that meant someone who had done this before. Ross keyed his mic again. "Dispatch. Request urgent cross-check for any similar incidents in tri-state area, elderly targets, homemade explosive devices, remote triggers. We might be dealing with a serial case." "Affirmative, Unit 4. Starting search now." Just then, a faint clicking noise echoed from under the armchair. Everyone froze. Juno stood up instantly, ears perked, body stiff. Evelyn gasped. "Is it going to explode?" Ross's eyes widened. He leaned in, scanning the underside of the chair, and saw it. A second device. This one was tucked into the hollow of the wooden frame. Smaller. With an antenna. He swallowed hard. The detonator in Evelyn's hand wasn't the only trigger. Someone could activate this from outside the house. Ross reached for his earpiece. "We need a signal jammer. Now. Possible remote activation. Advise Edie to use silent approach. We don't know who's listening." He stood, stepping back toward the front door, but again, Juno blocked his path. Not growling now, just staring. She didn't want him leaving either. And for the first time, Ross realized she wasn't just protecting him. She was listening. Her nose twitched. Her ears shifted slightly, then locked toward the back of the house. Ross followed her gaze. There was a hallway leading to the kitchen, and beyond that, the back door. Juno took one slow step forward. Then another. Ross followed. "What is it, girl?" She stopped near the kitchen island, then growled, low and deep. Ross peered out the back window. And froze. In the backyard was a man. Black hoodie. Cell phone in hand. Standing perfectly still. And staring right into the kitchen window. Ross's breath caught in his throat. There he was. The man in the black hoodie. Standing in the middle of Evelyn Holloway's backyard like he belonged there. Calm. Still. Cell phone in hand. His face obscured by the shadow of his hood. But there was something far more unsettling than his presence. It was the way he stood. Like he was waiting for something. Or someone. Juno's growl deepened. Her paws dug into the hardwood floor as if ready to launch. Ross gently pressed a hand to her collar, holding her back, his voice low and steady. "Easy, we don't know what he's holding." But he did know. That phone in the man's hand wasn't just a phone. It was the detonator. Ross's radio crackled. "Unit 4, be advised, bomb squad 1 minute out. Mobile jamming unit 10 seconds from activation. Maintain visual." He pressed his mic. "Target in backyard. One male, black hoodie, possibly armed with remote trigger. I repeat, possible live detonator in hand." The man took a single step forward. Juno snapped. Barked twice. Short, loud, deliberate. That was her alert. Ross had trained with her long enough to know her signals. One bark meant presence. 2 barks meant threat. Juno wasn't guessing, she was warning. Inside the living room, Evelyn whimpered from her chair. "He said he'd watch. Said if anyone came inside." Ross called out toward the window, his voice projecting clearly. "Sir. This is law enforcement. Drop the device and put your hands in the air." But the man didn't move. Not even a twitch. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, then lowered his thumb toward the phone. Juno moved first. In a blur of fur and muscle, she bolted past Ross, paws skidding across the floor, claws clicking against the tile as she barreled through the kitchen and lunged toward the back door. Ross shouted after her, "Juno! Wait!" But it was too late. The back door burst open. The man reacted fast, but not fast enough. Juno leapt with such force that it knocked the phone from his hand before he could press the screen. He staggered backward, crashing into a flower bed as she landed on top of him, snarling, her jaws snapping inches from his throat. Ross followed, weapon drawn, storming out into the backyard. On the ground. Hands behind your head. The man struggled under Juno's weight, gasping, clawing at the dirt. I didn't press it. Ross moved quickly, securing the phone first. Then he slapped cuffs around the man's wrists. Who sent you? He barked. The man said nothing. His silence was loud. Deliberate. Just then, Ross's earpiece buzzed. Signal jammer active. All remote devices within 100-foot radius now neutralized. Ross exhaled for the first time in what felt like forever. He looked down at Juno, who was still crouched beside the suspect, her eyes unblinking. Good girl, he whispered. Inside the house, bomb squad officers entered with precision, silent, quick, coordinated. They moved toward Evelyn with careful hands, their voices calm but focused. One officer knelt beside her, gently removing the detonator from her lap. Another scanned the underside of the chair, nodding quickly. We've got a second unit, live. Timer-based. 26 minutes left. Can you disarm? Already working on it. Ross stood in the backyard, watching the suspect as he was hoisted to his feet. He still hadn't said a word. But Ross knew that face. The sharp jawline. The twitch in his left eye. The scar across the chin. He'd seen his file before. Name's Daniel Carrick. Ross muttered, mostly to himself. Ex-military. Discharged dishonorably 5 years ago. Went dark after that. Suspected ties to fringe domestic groups. But they never had proof. Now they did. Juno sat beside Ross, tail still, gaze focused. As the officers led Carrick toward the waiting cruiser, Ross leaned in. Why Evelyn? Why her? For the first time, Carrick spoke. Because no one sees old people. He said coldly. They're invisible. Just like bombs should be. Ross clenched his jaw, fury bubbling beneath his calm. But before he could reply, the radio crackled again. Device 1 is disarmed. Secondary confirmed stable. Evelyn is safe. A wave of relief crashed over Ross. He looked down at Juno and let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. We couldn't have done this without you. But Juno wasn't relaxing. She turned her head slowly and stared back at the house. Something was wrong. Again. Ross followed her line of sight, through the back door, down the hallway, and into Evelyn's bedroom, where one of the bomb techs had just stepped in. And stopped. Sarge? The voice came over the radio. You need to see this. Ross walked in. And froze. On Evelyn's bed was a second set of clothing. Men's clothing. And next to the clothes, a wallet. With an ID. One name. Michael Holloway. Evelyn's husband. Dead, or so everyone thought. The wallet lay still on the bed. Worn leather. Frayed edges. And inside, a photo ID that shouldn't have existed anymore. Michael Holloway. Veteran. Born 1949. Husband to Evelyn Holloway. Declared legally deceased 6 years ago after a reported boating accident in Lake Erie. His body was never recovered. But the Coast Guard had closed the file. His funeral had been held. His name was etched on the headstone beside a plot of undisturbed earth. And yet, here was his wallet. With a valid license. With recent credit card receipts. One dated just 4 days ago. Sergeant Ross stared at the ID, a deep chill settling into his bones. His mind raced through the implications. Was Michael alive? Was he working with Carrick? Had Evelyn known all along? Juno let out a low, almost imperceptible whimper. Her nose pressed to the edge of the bed frame, then jerked toward the corner of the room. She stood. Stiff. Focused. Ross followed her gaze. There was a chest of drawers against the far wall. Nothing out of place. But Juno moved slowly toward it, each step careful. She sniffed along the baseboard, then scratched. Once. Twice. Then stopped. Ross knelt down, running his fingers along the edge of the floor. That's when he noticed it, just barely visible behind the dresser. A vent. But it wasn't connected to the HVAC system. It was smaller. Makeshift. Freshly screwed into the wall. Ross pulled out his multi-tool and loosened the cover. Inside, a tunnel. Narrow. Dark. Leading somewhere beneath the house. He tapped his radio. Unit 4. I've got a hidden crawlspace. Possible concealed access. Request backup and infrared sweep of the basement perimeter. Juno's tracking ascent. Copy that. Sending unit to rear basement entry now. Ross turned to Juno. You sure? Juno barked once. Then crawled in. Ross grabbed his flashlight and followed her, heart pounding louder with each foot of progress. The crawlspace was tight, dusty, lined with old insulation. The air was stale, like it hadn't moved in years. But Juno pressed forward with certainty, tail low, ears forward. After 20 feet, the tunnel opened into a larger underground chamber, part of an unfinished cellar. And that's when Ross saw it. A mattress. A desk. Canned food. Military maps pinned to the concrete walls. Radio equipment. A burner phone still plugged into the wall. And on the far side of the room, a folded American flag. This was more than a hiding place. This was a war room. Juno padded slowly around the space, then stopped beside a locked door at the back. She sniffed once, then backed away, letting out a sharp, short bark. Ross moved cautiously toward it. This is Ross. I've found a concealed basement bunker under the residence. Set up for long-term occupation. Possible second suspect behind secured door. Roger that. Entry team approaching from side entrance. Ross pressed his ear to the door. Silence. Then, a faint cough. He stepped back, drew his weapon, and waited as 2 officers came through the exterior stairs, silently flanking the door. On Ross's count, they breached. Inside was a man. Gray hair. Lean frame. Eyes wide with confusion, but not fear. He raised his hands slowly. Don't shoot. Ross froze. The man's voice was raspy, but familiar. Michael Holloway? The man nodded. I thought you were dead, Ross said quietly. I was supposed to be, Michael whispered. They brought him upstairs. Evelyn wept when she saw him, shocked, overwhelmed, nearly collapsing in her chair. Michael? How? Why? Ross demanded answers. And Michael gave them. 6 years ago, he'd gone undercover. Recruited by a classified division within Homeland Security, an off-books intelligence unit tracking extremist militias. One cell in particular had started grooming veterans, exploiting their trauma, and recruiting them to carry out attacks under the radar. Carrick was one of them. Michael had been chosen because of his military past, and because, on paper, he had no more family. Evelyn had agreed to keep his secret. They faked the boating accident. She grieved in public. But in truth, she kept his secret for all these years. Until last week. Michael had discovered that Carrick and the others were planning to use civilians, elderly, disabled, pregnant women, as unwilling carriers. Devices rigged with long-range triggers. No obvious traces. Invisible threats. He was going to stop them. But then Carrick got to Evelyn first. They used her to send me a message, Michael said, voice thick. To stay down. To keep silent. Or they'd kill her. Ross listened in stunned silence. Then he looked at Juno. She'd sensed it all. Not just the explosives, but the dread. The tension. The way evil seeped into the air. Juno had known Evelyn was in danger before anyone else did. "Why didn't you come out sooner?" Ross asked. Michael looked at his wife. "I didn't know if she was already dead." Evelyn reached for his hand, tears falling silently. "I waited," she whispered, "every day, praying you'd come back." The bomb squad finished sweeping the house. Both devices were successfully disarmed. Carrick was being processed and transferred to federal custody. And Evelyn, while shaken, was finally safe. But something still lingered in the air. An unanswered question. How many others were there? And who else was being watched? Ross walked Juno back to the squad car. She climbed in quietly, resting her head on the back seat cushion, her tail curled around her side. She looked tired, but not defeated. He sat beside her, brushing a hand down her fur. "You saved lives today, girl," he whispered. Juno closed her eyes. And for the first time that morning, the world was silent. The holding cell was quiet. Carrick sat alone, hands cuffed to the table, his eyes scanning the corners of the interrogation room like he could memorize the layout by force of will. He hadn't spoken since his arrest, not even when the federal agents arrived. But there was something about his stillness that made every officer uneasy, like a man who had already made peace with what came next. Ross stood behind the two-way glass, arms folded. The bomb squad had cleared the Holloway house completely. Forensics had confirmed both explosive devices were real, one of them sophisticated enough to suggest overseas construction. The phone retrieved from Carrick had been remotely wiped before they could extract data. And that left one possibility. There were others. Ross stepped into the room. Carrick looked up, expression unreadable. "We know you didn't act alone," Ross said. "We found the maps. The radios. The documents. This was coordinated." Carrick smirked, just barely. "You think you stopped something. I think we stopped you. And that's a damn good start." Carrick leaned forward, chains rattling. "Do you really believe that old man came back just in time? You think he's a hero? He's a fossil. You people, protect the weak like they matter." Ross's jaw clenched. "They do," he said simply. Outside, in the hallway, Juno sat patiently beside her handler's gear. But the moment Carrick's voice raised, her ears twitched. Her body tensed. She stood and walked slowly toward the room, nose flaring at the air beneath the door. Inside, Carrick suddenly stopped speaking. He turned toward the wall, toward the one-way glass, and smiled coldly. "She's listening," he said. Ross blinked. "What?" "The dog," Carrick murmured. "She always listens, doesn't she?" Ross said nothing. Carrick leaned back in his chair. "You think she stopped a bomb? Cute. But that wasn't the plan." Ross narrowed his eyes. "Then what was the plan?" Carrick looked up and said something that made the blood in Ross's veins run cold. "To test her." For a moment time stopped. Ross stepped back, confusion and dread tangling in his chest. "What are you talking about?" Carrick didn't answer. But outside the interrogation room, a call came into dispatch. A second incident. Another welfare check, this time. A blind woman and her son hadn't been heard from in 3 days. Different neighborhood. Same pattern. Same reports of nothing wrong from the outside. Ross didn't wait. He grabbed his vest, called in 2 backup units, and snapped Juno's leash onto her collar. She was already alert, pulling at the lead before they reached the cruiser. 10 minutes later, they arrived at a modest 2-story home just north of town. The porch was neat. Mail collected. Windows locked. But Juno stiffened before they even stepped out of the car. Her nose hit the wind. She growled. Then barked twice. Ross's chest tightened. "Stay sharp," he ordered the team. "Same approach as Holloway residents. Treat as potential active threat." As they approached the front door, Juno began pacing again, nosing the base of the steps, circling the side of the house. Then, without warning, she bolted toward the backyard. Ross followed. There, behind a stack of firewood, was a small vent. Identical to the one at Evelyn's house. Ross didn't hesitate. We've got another crawl space. Breach the rear entrance. Inside, they found the woman, tied to a chair in the living room, tear-streaked and weak, but alive. Her son was in a locked closet, dazed but unharmed. And strapped beneath the couch was another device. Disarmed in time. Because Juno had known. Again. That night, federal agents brought Ross and Juno in to debrief with the Joint Task Force. They laid out the truth. Carrick was part of a sleeper cell. They weren't just testing devices. They were testing reactions. How fast police responded. How trained dogs responded. Which K-9 units were assigned to which districts. And most disturbingly of all, they had been tracking Juno. Ross stared at the board in disbelief. There were printed logs. K-9 assignment sheets. GPS traces. Audio recordings of her bark patterns. One chart had her name at the center. Juno, threat level, critical. She wasn't just a hero. She was a target. Later that week, Ross sat beside Juno in their unit's training yard, watching her chase a ball lazily under the warm evening light. The world outside was quiet again, for now. But he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. "Looks like you made some enemies, girl," he muttered. Juno returned with the ball, tail wagging like she didn't have a care in the world. But Ross knew better. She did care. That was the difference. She felt the danger before anyone else. And she never hesitated, not once. As the sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows over the field, Ross reached down and ran a hand through her fur. "You didn't just save Evelyn," he said softly. "You stopped something a whole lot bigger." Juno leaned her head against his leg and let out a small, contented sigh. But somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. And Ross knew. They weren't done yet. The ceremony was small, private. No cameras. No reporters. Just a handful of officers, a few federal agents, and a German shepherd with tired eyes and a steel heart. Sergeant Daniel Ross stood at the podium, his uniform freshly pressed, the Medal of Valor glinting in the late afternoon sun. Juno sat beside him, wearing her own medal, a silver star affixed to a navy blue service collar. She didn't understand the applause. But she understood Ross's voice. And in the line of duty she placed herself between us and the unknown. Not because she was told to. But because she knew. Because she felt something no one else did. And she acted, not with fear, but with purpose. With loyalty. His voice faltered just a moment. Because that's what heroes do. The room stood in silence. A reverence that spoke louder than any speech. Then the applause returned, gentle at first, then stronger. It wasn't the kind of applause meant for celebration. It was the kind reserved for sacrifice. Later, after the room had emptied, Ross walked Juno back to his patrol SUV. He opened the passenger door, but this time, she hesitated. He crouched beside her. "You okay, girl?" Juno looked up at him, and for the first time, he noticed it. A tremble. Barely there, but present. Deep in her shoulders. Deep in her breath. She wasn't afraid. She was tired. Ross gently stroked behind her ears. "Let's get you somewhere quiet." But before they could leave, a federal agent approached. Black suit, no smile. He handed Ross an envelope. "Effective immediately," the man said. "Juno is under protective assignment. She'll be moved tonight." Ross's jaw clenched. "You're taking her? It's not a punishment. It's precaution. Your unit was compromised. Juno's location was mapped. We have reason to believe there are still people out there, watching." Ross stood, shielding Juno slightly with his body. "She's not just a tool. She's my partner." The agent nodded. "And we intend to treat her as such. She'll be housed at a secure facility. Private handlers, top-level surveillance. You'll have access. But she can't go on patrol until we're sure the threat is neutralized." Ross didn't answer. He looked down at Juno. She looked back, ears up, eyes steady. Almost like she knew she was being reassigned. Just for a while, Ross whispered. Okay? Just until we figure this out. That night, Juno was loaded into an unmarked transport van. She didn't bark. Didn't resist. Just turned once before the doors shut, and gave Ross one last look. Then she was gone. And for the first time in years, he felt completely alone. 3 days passed. Ross returned to routine patrols. Same roads. Same calls. But everything felt off. Like moving through fog. Every little thing caught his attention. A parked car too long at a curb, a man lingering at a crosswalk, an empty van with the engine still warm. He couldn't stop looking over his shoulder. Until one morning, a sealed package arrived at the precinct. No return address. No markings. Just his name. Inside, a flash drive. He inserted it into a secure terminal. And what played chilled him to the core. It was video footage, grainy, black and white surveillance from a rooftop camera. The angle showed the sidewalk outside his house. Date stamped just 48 hours ago. Juno's transport van. Parked at the curb. Then, a second van. Unmarked. Dark. And a man stepped out. Face obscured. He approached Juno's transport, and placed something underneath. Ross froze the frame. A black box. Magnetized. Small. A tracker. And Juno was no longer safe. Ross called the agency immediately. But it was too late. The secure kennel had been breached. Cameras disabled. Handlers tranquilized. And Juno, missing. Vanished. Now the roles had reversed. The dog who once protected the city was the one who needed saving. Ross knew what he had to do. He pulled every contact. Reviewed every case. Reopened files from the Carrick investigation. And in doing so, uncovered something no one had noticed. An off-grid cabin, registered under a false name, but with financial ties to a shell company Carrick once managed. Located in the outskirts of Millerton Forest. 40 miles north. Remote. No cell coverage. Perfect for hiding someone, or something. He drove through the night. Wind howling through the trees. Gun holstered. Heart pounding. As he approached the cabin, headlights caught movement. A shadow darting across the porch. He parked. Drew his weapon. Advanced silently. Then, he heard it. A bark. Short. Sharp. Familiar. Juno. He kicked in the door. And there she was. Muzzled. Shackled. But alive. And beside her, 2 men, startled mid-conversation. One with a phone in his hand. The other with a detonator. Ross didn't hesitate. 3 shots fired. One hit the floor beside the detonator. One struck the phone from the man's grip. And the third. The third made him drop to the ground, hands raised. Juno lunged the second she was unshackled, pinning the second suspect down, growling low as Ross cuffed the first. They'd planned to use her again. Trap the city. Make her carry a threat she couldn't understand. But once again, she chose to fight. They returned before sunrise. Bruised. Exhausted. But alive. The department met them in silence. Ross walked Juno through the front doors of the precinct like a soldier returning from war. And in that moment, no badge, no medal, no uniform mattered. Just a man. And his dog. Together again. But they both knew. It still wasn't over. The courtroom was silent as the judge read the final sentence. Daniel Carrick, you are hereby sentenced to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole for crimes including domestic terrorism, conspiracy to commit murder, unlawful possession of explosives, and endangerment of civilians. No one clapped. No one cheered. There was only the quiet sound of justice settling into place. Sergeant Daniel Ross sat in the back row, his uniform neat, his hands folded tightly in his lap. At his feet lay Juno, calm, alert, eyes fixed straight ahead like she understood every word. And maybe in her own way she did. The verdict wasn't just about Carrick. It was about all the others they'd stopped. About Evelyn Holloway. About the blind woman and her son. About the handlers who'd risked their lives when Juno was taken. This was the end of something dark. But it wasn't the end of the story. 2 weeks later, the precinct held a second ceremony, smaller, quieter. This time, it wasn't for valor. It was for goodbye. Juno was being retired from active duty. Her service had gone beyond what any department could have asked. Not just because she'd saved lives. Not because she chased down criminals or tracked hidden threats. But because she'd felt what others missed. She listened when others ignored the signs. She stood when others doubted. She acted when even trained men hesitated. Ross stood at the front of the room, voice steady but soft. Some officers wear stars. Some carry guns. Some wear badges. But the bravest among us sometimes walk on 4 legs, without a word, without hesitation, and without ever asking why. Juno sat beside him, calm as ever. When he clipped off her badge and collar for the final time, she looked up at him, and for a brief second, he swore she smiled. She didn't go to a farm, or a government kennel. She went home, with him. To a quiet little house at the edge of town. There she had a yard. A bed by the fireplace. A bowl with her name on it. And peace. Real peace. Sometimes, Ross would wake in the middle of the night, still hearing distant echoes of sirens, or feeling phantom weight of his holster on his hip. But then he'd hear the soft thud of paws down the hallway, and Juno would curl up beside the bed, resting her head on his boots. And he could breathe again. Years passed. And in time, Juno's muzzle grayed. She no longer chased balls with the same fire. But she always stood when she heard the garage door open. Always waited at the porch for Ross to come home. And always, watched the front door like she knew something no one else did. One spring morning, Ross found her lying under the old sycamore in the backyard. The sun was warm. The birds were singing. Her breathing was slow, steady, and still. He sat beside her for a long time, hand resting on her fur, not saying a word. No funeral was held. But that week, the department lowered the flag to half-mast. And outside the precinct, they mounted a small bronze plaque. It read, K9 Juno, service without fear, loyalty without question. Sometimes, late at night, Ross would drive past the old Holloway house. Evelyn had moved in with her niece in Arizona. The porch light was still broken. The curtains still drawn. But he remembered that day, when a dog refused to let him open a door, because something inside was waiting to kill them both. And that refusal saved lives. It was never about disobedience. It was about trust, instinct, and love.